Hello everyone, my name is Hubert and welcome to Teach Me channel. Today we will be looking at GCSE biology. Namely, we will be looking at chromosomes and mitosis. So today I will tell you all about the chromosomes and about how the cells divide via a process called mitosis. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Now, if we think about DNA, this is our nucleus of a cell. So we have a cell with a nucleus, and the genetic material, the DNA, is stored inside that nucleus. However, it is not stored randomly. It is actually highly organized. And the way the cells organizes that DNA, that genetic material, is via chromosomes, via these structures called chromosomes. Now, these are chromosomes. I'm gonna write it down here. Chromosomes. Okay. So these are chromosomes, and each of these little bars, chromosomes are like these kind of bars, and they are full of the genetic material. And each chromosome contains a lot of genes. So these genes here, I show them as these bars. So each bar here represents one gene. Now, why do we have two bars next to each other lined up like this? Now, that is because each cell inherits for each corresponding genes. Each cell inherits one chromosome from a mother and one chromosome from the father. That's how we inherit the genetics. So we essentially inherit these pairs of chromosomes, and one of these chromosomes comes from your mother and one comes from your father. And that's how they pair up, because they have the same corresponding genes. However, one of them has the father's version and one of them has the mother's version. Now, that's why we have them in pairs. Now, in human cells, in a normal state, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, and these contain all the genetic information that our cell needs. And this is the way the cells essentially store that genetic information in highly organized ways in structures called chromosomes. Okay, so knowing that we have 23 pairs of chromosomes, each one member of each of those pairs comes from a mother and the other one comes from a father. That's how they put each other together. Now we can start talking about how cells divide. So cells divide via a process called mitosis. So let me write it down for you. Mitosis. So in order to divide, cell needs to do few things. First of all, let's just go through this. Let's just go through this. I'm gonna draw out the cells for you, and we will go through each stage that the cell needs to complete in order to divide. Now, mitosis, why the cells would divide? The cells would divide in order to repair or to grow. Now, to grow is obvious. If we want to grow, we need more cells, so we need to do more mitosis, so we get more cells. Repair, however, is, for example, if we have lost some cells, if some cells have died for whatever reason, well, cells around those dead cells need to do mitosis to replace those dead cells. That's why we need mitosis for repair as well. And mitosis results in identical cells. So, when a cell divides, it produces two identical cells. So, I'm going to put this down. Results in two identical cells. So these are the important things about mitosis. Now, how does it happen? How on earth does it happen? Well, it happens somewhat like this. First of all, we have a parent cell. So we have a cell, we have a nucleus inside it, and a cytoplasm. So inside nucleus we have a genetic material, but at this stage it is not very organized. It is sort of loosely swimming around that nucleus, and there is no sort of good structure to it. So first things first, what the cell needs to do? The cell needs to grow a bit, so it will get slightly bigger, because obviously it's going to divide, so it's going to sort of split in two. So it first needs to grow, and what happens? It grows because it needs to replace, it needs to duplicate all these organelles. All these things outside nucleus also need to be duplicated, because we will be splitting them in two, we'll be ripping it apart into two new cells. So that's why a cell needs to duplicate all the stuff, all the organelles, all the mitochondria, everything that's outside nucleus. It needs to be duplicated in order for the cell to be even able to divide, to have two cells capable of functioning. Now, so that's happening outside the nucleus. However, inside the nucleus, the cells need to organize their DNA. They need to organize their genetic material. So now they tightly coil that genetic material into chromosomes, into the shape of chromosomes that we know and love. So it will basically start coiling them into these chromosomes, into these little bars that contain all the genes that we need. However, what also needs to happen, because we are splitting that cell into two, what also needs to happen is it needs to duplicate, it needs to double all the genetic material. So it duplicates these chromosomes. So say, for example, these came from the mother and these came from the father. Now, each of those needs to be duplicated. They get duplicated. So we have duplicates forming like this. For both mother versions and the father versions, everything gets duplicated. Now, what is interesting is when we look at that chromosome, so we have the original in red and we have the duplicate in green. In case of mother's version of chromosomes. So we're looking at this, so we have an original and duplicate. Now, important thing to consider is that unlike before, these duplicates of mother's version or these duplicates of father's version are identical to original. So they form these X structures. And this one here is identical to this one, because they are duplicates of each other. So when the cells split into two, each one of these will receive one of these duplicates. Okay, so here we had multiplication of these different organelles outside nucleus. We had coiling of the genetic material of the DNA, and we have duplicating of the genetic material. Now, what happens next? Well, what happens next is interesting. The nucleus breaks down, so we no longer have that clear nucleus, we just have the cell. And what happens is these spindle fibers form on the opposite sides of the cell. And what also happens is these chromosomes line up. So I'm just going to simplify it here, just going to use red and green. So they all line up along the center of the cell. They all line up along the center of the cell. Now, I'm put here green, but they are all the same. So they all gonna be like this now, just for the sake of simplicity. Okay, so they all line up along the center of the cell, and these spindle fibers attach themselves to each side of that X, of that chromosome X structure. So those spindle fibers go like this, and they all attach to each side of that X structure. Now, what happens next is something like this. So we still have the cell, we still have the spindle fibers, but what happens is those spindle fibers pull backwards like this. They pull the chromosomes apart. They pull the chromosome pairs apart like so. And now I'm gonna draw quickly the chromosomes. So they all get pulled apart. Literally, we're splitting that cell in half. We're pulling that genetic material in half. We duplicated it, and now we're pulling it in half, so we go back to the original number of chromosomes in each cell. So we're pulling this apart, and what happens next, I'm gonna go like this. What happens next now is we have two cells starting to form. Now we have two nuclei with those chromosomes now in that form, like this, and that genetic material in this one again is identical to genetic material in this one because we duplicated them and pulled them apart. So these genetic materials in both of these cells are in fact identical. Now, the final thing that needs to happen is, because now we split the nuclei, we just need to split the cytoplasm, the outside of the cell. We just need to finish splitting that. So these cells split, and now we have two completely independent cells that are identical to each other. They are identical. So let me just finish this off like this. So we have two independent cells that are identical to each other. And this is it, guys, for today. Thank you very much for listening. If you want to stay up to date on math, science, and some biomedical science videos, smash that subscribe button below. If you like this video, give me a big thumbs up. And if you got any questions whatsoever, shoot me the question in comments. Thank you again for listening. I really appreciate this, and see you next time.